How are you doing today, Mike?
Great, great. Thanks for having me out.
Feels like we've walked into an octagon or something.
Well, I've never had a walk-up song before, so this is fantastic.
No better day to get a new walk-up song. Well, Mike, obviously we're here to talk about defense innovation, and none better to talk to than yourself at the Defense Innovation Unit. You used to be DIUX, new little name change in the past year or so.
That's right, yep. A couple big changes for us. We've been around for about 4 years, but in our current model, we've been around for about 3 years. So the mission of the Defense Innovation Unit is to accelerate commercial technology to the Department of Defense. And what we also want to do is we also want to grow the National Security Innovation Base. So we see the National Security Innovation Base as that evolution of industry, government, and academia that birthed Silicon Valley back in the 60s and 70s that led to the ecosystem that it is today. Then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter stood up DIUX at the time in 2015 as tech discovery, finding cool tech and trying to bring it to the department. They found that that didn't work as well, and they flipped the switch, so to speak, in 2016, and put in our current business model where we start with a DoD customer with a simply stated problem and put it out to industry. And we're looking for a simply stated problem, not a requirements document. We're looking for half a page, a paragraph, something like that. Our record is a sentence. It was a run-on sentence, but it was a sentence nonetheless. And it actually came from Special Ops Command, so the fact that the words were spelled right, I knew they were doing the best they can. Hopefully there are no Special Ops folks out there. No one behind me. So we take that simply stated problem and put it out to industry, and we want a 5-page white paper, a 15-page slide deck back from them to solve the problem. And then we look to award a prototype contract within 60 to 90 days and field the technology within 2 years. We've awarded about 105 prototype contracts to date, 3 production contracts. And so why commercial technology? We've found that the commercial industry outspends government by about $200 billion per year in R&D, and we want to capture that and leverage that and get that to men and women in uniform. In fact, a data point I saw recently, in the 1960s, 30% of global R&D was US DoD related. So let me say that again. 1/3 of worldwide research and development was related to the United States Department of Defense. Now that number is 3.7%. So we want to be able to leverage and capitalize on all of that commercial R&D that's taken place out there. A couple changes going forward. You mentioned Drop the X. Secretary of Defense Mattis directed us to drop the X to transmit our permanence in the defense innovation ecosystem. Very exciting. We also brought on Mike Brown as the director of DIU, former Symantec CEO, also had a couple startups in the Valley, so that was a great addition. So some big changes, things that we're looking forward to the future.
Yeah, and so you talked about that kind of that gap and how the defense industry has changed a lot in those many years. So what are you guys doing? What kind of projects can you point us to of the type of work that you guys are looking to do and how you're reaching out to commercial industries? I know you work a lot in OTAs. It's kind of a new buzzword, but can you talk a little bit about that work as well?
Right, you bet. So OTAs, other transaction authorities, are one thing that allows us to go fast, but that process I briefly described where we take a simply stated problem, we call that a CSO, Commercial Solutions Opening. And that's what allows us to go fast, is it isn't a requirements document, allows us to negotiate intellectual property, those type of things. So that's how we can go fast. Like I said, we've awarded about 105 prototype contracts. So now what we're looking to do is we're looking for the transformational projects, the transformative projects that we can scale across services, platforms, those type of things. So that's a big part of our analysis when we look at those problem statements from the services. What do we want to take on? And we have more business than we can accomplish right now. We work with ACC New Jersey as our primary contracting arm. Great partnership, but just not the bandwidth for the business we have. So we've brought on WHS as a organization to help us increase that bandwidth. And we're also delegated contracting capability by Ellen Lord. Ms. Lord delegated that capability to us. So we are able to award our own contracts going forward, which will allow us to continue to accelerate and move forward. I also talked about the National Security Innovation Base. And we have brought on, since 2016, brought in 45 brand new companies that have never done business with the Department of Defense that now are not only on prototype contracts, but on FAR-based contracts and working as subs to primes, that type of thing. So we're also bringing in new participants in that national security innovation base.
And I know you guys have made some new announcements recently with like MD5 and the innovative accelerators and those types. So can you tell us a little bit about that progress there?
You bet. The Undersecretary of Defense for Army directed us to take over management of what's called the National Security Innovation Capital and National Security Innovation Network. National Security Innovation Capital comes from Section 230 of the 19 NDAA, and the primary effort there is to catalyze investment in dual-use hardware. Right now, about 90% of American venture capital is aimed at software. There's a shorter horizon for return on investment. It's de-risked relative to hardware. And so oftentimes, hardware companies need to look offshore for investment, but there are second and third order effects to that. There's some intellectual property issues, those type of things. So what we're looking to do with the National Security Innovation Capital is to provide some education, but to also be a mechanism for signaling from the Department of Defense of hardware, dual-use hardware, that we think is going to be critical for the mission set for the department. And then not only signal, but provide some financial backup on that for that signaling. You also mentioned National Security Innovation Network, formerly MD5. And it's a network because it's a network of approximately 30 universities right now. And Ensign, as we call it, works with early stage development to commercialize a lot of early stage technology, bring it into the Department of Defense. And Ensign also works to illuminate a path to the defense marketplace for talent, looking to let folks know in college when they take Hacking for Defense, the Hacking for Defense course to colleges, that serving in the Department of Defense and STEM-related fields is a fantastic public service viable option once they graduate from universities. And it's amazing how many folks aren't aware of that career path.
So one thing I always like to ask people when it comes to these sorts of big innovative transformation, there's always a cultural element to it, and I know that's something we've talked about a little bit. So what kind of culture change is it going to take to sort of drive the adoption of these technologies and methodologies that you guys are trying to push forward?
Yeah, you hit on two keywords in that. And I think most folks here have heard it before, but the department doesn't have an innovation problem. It has an innovation adoption problem. We're always looking for folks to try out new methodologies, new ways of doing business, folks that can step outside the conventional thinking. And we don't just prototype technology, we also prototype methodologies. And that's an important word, the prototyping piece, to start small and show that new technologies work, but also new ways of thinking, new ways of doing business work. An example for us is we have what's called a hacker program. OTAs are widely available to a lot of organizations. Now that authority's been delegated fairly widely, but they're not used that widely. And so what we do is we bring in contracting officers across the department and show them our methodology, our model, for about 4 to 6 months, and then we send them back out to their parent organization to take that knowledge back out there. We've also been working with other companies across the department, other organizations across the department, that have adopted our CSO process. So other entities are now using that rapid prototyping process to find out what the problem is, get right to the problem, and allow commercial industry to give back simply stated solutions and then work from there. So for us, it is prototyping the methodologies.
And so, for the innovators in the room, they might not have worked with you or DoD in the past. What kind of advice might you have for them? Or if they're interested in finding a CSO, obviously they're on the DAU website, but what other sort of information do you have for the people who might not think they're the traditional partner for DoD?
You bet, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the non-traditional partners. You're exactly right. We do have a CSO out on the website right now, I believe, diu.mil. So check it out. You can also drop us an email and take a look there. But look, modernization of the Department of Defense is going to take all kinds of entities. It's going to take the non-traditionals. It's going to take the small businesses. It's going to take the systems integrators and the traditional defense contractors. We find the innovation in the non-traditional companies, the small businesses. I think the the number is 14 to 1 patents for small business to large. And I understand patents and invention is a little bit different than innovation, but then we also need that scalability, that ability to scale rapidly, especially that the systems integrators and the traditional businesses, traditional defense industrial-based companies have already solved. So it's going to take the entire spectrum for Defense Department modernization.
And Mike, as we kind of close out here, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to offer on, kind of closing that gap from prototype and like you talked about transformative projects?
You bet. So I think we can all acknowledge that we are in an era of renewed great power competition. And the tech race is the absolute most important front of that, because if we lose that race, we are going to lose by a much greater margin all the future products and applications that these foundational technologies are going to afford. So really, it's what I think of three things, investing in ourselves. We got to keep the R&D investment up. We have to continue to invest in R&D. I talked about that trifecta of government, industry, and academia initially. We need to continue to build that connective tissue to allow the ecosystems to develop around the country. And again, not just in Silicon Valley, but we want the best technology that America has to offer. We need to lower those barriers to entry to the defense marketplace that we seek to do. I mentioned intellectual property before. That's one of them. But the flip side is what we want to do. We want to work with DoD and help DoD learn to be a more sophisticated partner for commercial industry, to understand non-dilutive capital, to understand some of those other dynamics of the commercial industry. And then finally, we need to reinvest in ourselves. We need to refocus on STEM education in early education years. We need to come up with some moonshots that we can rally society around. This is not a whole of DoD problem or solution or a whole of government. This is a whole of society solution that we need.
Well, great. Mike, that's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Billy. Thanks for having us out. I appreciate it.